First, it's so important to work with a professional, go to therapy. I am not trained in therapy, and I think that's a very, very important aspect of this process. And the reason I start with that is because many times people in positions of religious reminders may give an answer, and that is my personal reflection, but not my professionally trained, training on an issue like this. So make sure to work with a professional if you're going through this process. It's really, really important. But that being said, sometimes you may want a different parent as a younger person for a lot of reasons. And now, I'm going to preface this by saying, as long as the parent is healthy, they're not abusive, they're not neglectful, they're not manipulative intentionally. Every one of us may have aspects of times where we're angry or hurt or frustrated and those emotions come out. That's different from abuse. Now, that's a different circumstance. But let's say you just wish that, for example, I've heard from young women who are very involved in religion and they want to wear hijab, and their mom is saying, absolutely not, you're not allowed to wear hijab. You can never wear hijab in this house. And they think, I just wish my mom was someone else who loves hijab and wants me to wear. I've heard young women say that. In the same way, like imagine, someone who just wishes that someone else was their parent who could encourage their identity growth, or just listening, just spending the time to listen to them, but they're too busy, or they're too influenced by culture where they, I've heard things where the children are not encouraged to show any sort of emotion or cry at all, because in that culture it's a sign of weakness, and they don't want to have weak children. Like, that is not necessarily, like, we can say that when that comes from a cultural perspective, it's not necessarily parents trying to be harmful because they don't like their children. They have been conditioned to believe that this is what is helpful for their kids, and they want their children to be strong and resilient. All of the navigating of all of those messages sometimes is very hard when you're 6 or 16 or even 26. But as you get older, there's a few things that I think may Allah protect them. I think is something that I think as we get older, if we're blessed with just the ability to step away and reflect, we can understand that our parents are people who have come to decisions because of their own trauma, their own cultural baggage, realities, their own environment that they were raised in, them trying to hold on to their children despite the messages that they're being inundated with. If parents are immigrants, they've gone through so many different changes, maybe having to learn a whole new language and a whole new reality, not having the support that they expected to have of their parents, raising their own kids, and now in a society they've never been exposed to before. We can acknowledge as adults that there's a lot that goes into all of that, and that it's understandable that the stress of that is going to affect your parenting. You are much more patient as a parent when you are well fed and showered and dressed and feel comfortable than when you are so stressed out you can't sleep. As a parent, you have more patience. So I think, one, just acknowledging, like, parents are human. And I think, as you become a parent, you acknowledge that, oh, that moment that I thought, when I was a kid, and like, why did my mom do that? I understand now, because as a parent, I can put myself in her shoes. I can understand that. And acknowledging that even the prophets, like you said, had very difficult parental relationships. And when we're talking about abuse, Ibrahim alayhi salam, father literally threw him into fire. That is abusive. That is probably one of the biggest forms of abuse. So we can, one, acknowledge that our parents are human. Two, acknowledge that Allah still chose Ibrahim's father to be that man. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala still chose your parents to be your parents for a reason. And it's part of who you are. Would it be helpful for us to look at a young boy who's raised with such a nurturing environment where every day he comes home and his mom is, or dad or his parent is there, and they're like, I made you hot chocolate today, and here is a carrot, cucumbers, and let's just sit and hug each other for a moment and tell me about your day, and now let's read a book, or whatever that looks like, and now let's recite Surah Al-Duha together. That is very different from being screamed at to pray, being screamed at to memorize Quran, being hit to memorize Quran. The person who is raised in the first environment and comes to the masjid, maybe they're praying out of love for salah. But maybe the second one, 20 years later, is coming back to the masjid and struggling to even pray 2 rak'ahs without the anxiety that prayer brings. Are those two people the same in front of Allah? They're different. And only Allah knows the reward that each one of them is going to receive, because He knows their experiences and the reality and all of what has made up who they are today. And I don't know if I can give you advice, anyone, on how to navigate the relationship. That's the therapy part. But I will say that there's a reason Allah chose your parents to be your parents. And maybe that reason is sometimes it just means that you are going to be better than, inshallah, who they were. But also it's an acknowledgement that you are connected to the line of prophets who also went through this type of hardship. And if the prophets went through this, then what does that say about anyone who's struggling with this? That it is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's something that can help you come close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala despite it, as the prophets did.
MashaAllah. Amazing answer. Jazakallah khair.